Hello, and welcome to All Things Creepy. I'm your host, Micah James. For the first episode, I wanted to share a local haunted spot, local to me, while also sharing with you guys a personal story that I've experienced at this house. And without really beating around the bush, uh, it is the Mark Twain house. If you grew up in Connecticut, you probably took a lot of trips to Hartford to visit the Mark Twain house. And at least in my experience, it was usually during grade school, between grades maybe 2 and 5, maybe, where they take you around his very grand house. I, th- I think it was something like 3 or 4 stories, but that's not creepy. That's or at least it's not creepy in and of itself. When I was in college, I was part of my paranormal group on campus and we went to the ghost tour. That's where the creepy stuff is. And I think it's important to kind of like understand Mark Twain's family a little bit before we go into the hauntings specifically. Mark Twain was born Samuel Clemens. So if you end up hearing me refer to someone as Clemens, I just wanted to give you that context that Mark Twain was born Samuel Clemens. Anyways, Twain did marry Olivia Langdon. Olivia herself came from a quote, wealthy but liberal family. She at first rejected his marriage proposal. However, they did end up marrying in February 1870. They lived together in Buffalo, New York from 1869 to 1871. Event Unfortunately, while they were living in Buffalo, their only son Langdon died of diphtheria at the very young age of 19 months. They did end up having 3 daughters, Susie, Clara, and Jean, and they eventually moved to Hartford, Connecticut in 1873. While they were living in Hartford, they did unfortunately lose their daughter, Susie. She was only 24 years old. She did develop a fever, which ended up turning into spinal meningitis. She When this started happening, she was not living with her family, but as she developed it, she moved in back in with her family and stayed in her parents' bed. She ended up also developing delirium and eventually lost her sight and lapsed into a coma. She died on August 18th, 1896. And of course, this, as you can imagine, devastated the family. Clara, their middle daughter, ended up living a pretty full life. She died at the age of 88, and it seems like her death was a little bit more natural, as, like I said, she did die at 88. Jean, their youngest daughter, also unfortunately died pretty young at age 29. She suffered from epilepsy from the young age of 18. Mark Twain attributed it to a head injury that she got when she was like right around 8 or 9. Uh, while she was staying at her dad's home in Reading, Connecticut, she was found dead in the bathtub on December 24th, 1909. They believe that she was they believe that the most likely cause of death was drowning due to a seizure. So, unfortunately, Mark and Olivia lost 3 children before they themselves passed away. So they had a very tough life in general. And I just kind of like to give this context for when we kind of go into the hauntings. Now, other things that I want to mention before we go into the potential hauntings is they is just like the fact that they did throw a lot of parties. So you when you go on these ghost tours, you tend to you might end up hearing like these residual hauntings of like a lot of people talking, hanging out, seeming to have a really fantastic time. They also had this butler named George, and he was said to be very protective of the family. So, now, given that context, uh, some of the hauntings that have occurred, um, something that's like kind of universal to some extent is the White Lady, the legend of White Ladies, and Mark Twain's Hartford, Connecticut house is no exception to this urban legend. People, so when you enter into the house, you're greeted by this grand foyer. To the left is this little to the right is this little parlor room, and to the left is this grand staircase. And a lot of people have reported seeing this lady in white walking up the stairs. Many people believe that this is Mark Twain's first daughter, Susie, as she did die in that home. Other people think that it might be Olivia. Susie has been seen in her parents' bedroom as she did spend a lot of time in their bed when she became sick. Now, when you enter the parlor, it has a little keyboard, not a keyboard, a piano that people play, and that's when you kind of might end up starting to hear like the remnants of a party. Now, this is kind of where I started to get my first experience. I like to call myself a hopeful skeptic, and I always like to start my story with this. I don't necessarily I'm not necessarily a believer, but I also don't not believe either. But we were in the parlor. Our tour guide was telling us about Samuel Clemens and his family, and they get to Susie, and all of a sudden, we're in the kitchen. I know that we were in the dining room, and I know that she finished talking about Mark Twain's kids just because that's just the logical timeline, right? And sure, you could I've been trying, much like you guys, I've been trying to like brush it off. Like you can rightfully tell me like, "Oh, Micah, no, you weren't haunted, you weren't temporarily possessed. You just spaced out." I totally agree with that. Like that's 100% a possibility. And I just kind of came back to once we got into the kitchen. the thing is, the reason why I'm almost the reason why I'm almost neutral about the situation where it could be either way is because when I space out like that and I don't necessarily pay attention to what people are saying to me, I'm still somewhat aware of my surroundings. Like if it was simply me spacing out, I would still be conscious of the fact that, like, oh, now we moved to the dining room, now we've moved to the kitchen. So that's kind of like where I'm at. That's where my head is. So in the kitchen, what I remember our tour guide telling us is that sometimes people would hear the chef cooking something and all that. Now, through the majority of the house, people might see glimpses, but there nothing notable necessarily, that at least that not that I remember. It's not until we get to the third floor and we get to George's room, George the butler. The tour guide says that he is often the one that people see the most, along with the white lady. And we get to George's room, and she's telling us how a lot of people have told her that they've seen this man kind of like peer out through the door frame and kind of look at them. Not necessarily in an unfriendly way, but also not in a friendly way either. Kind of a very serious look, which gave me chills down my spine. Now, it's like one of those situations where it's like if you didn't know that that was George's room, you probably wouldn't get the same chill than if you did know. But I vividly remember walking, going to take a look in George's room and just feeling this cold spot that was and it's was like one of those cold spots that was like you can't really explain it. Like if it was one of those cold spots where if it was cold, it would kind of be in more than just this singular area. Uh she also said that people have seen George kind of follow the group. She also herself has seen George almost like after hours, like after the ghost tour, and that freaked me out a lot. Um, Mark Twain also had a billiard room, and people have reported hearing like the crack of the billiards. Now, for the most of the rest of the tour, she was mostly just talking about the history of the house and a lot of residual hauntings. In case you don't know what a residual haunting is, that's more of like where the energy just kind of has been like stored in the house or, whatever location it is. And these spirits are just kind of going over and over what they did in life. So it's not intelligent. It's just, like if you see it or hear it, it's not going to harm you. The next kind of exciting part to kind of wrap up almost this episode is we get down to the basement. Now, here's the thing: basements, especially if they're unfinished, are creepy regardless of the context. But knowing that this place was haunted kind of gave it a even more like chilling factor, right? But we get down to the basement. There's like two or three people behind me. The reason why I mentioned this will become clear in like literally just a second. But two or three people are behind me, and like we're all just like gathering up so we can like all hear our tour guide. And all of a sudden, I feel this hand on my shoulder. And like I'm thinking like, okay, one of the people behind me just like tripped and just grabbed onto me. But it was weird. I kind of looked back to see if it was one of them. None of them looked like they just tripped. It was one of those feelings where it's like, if you feel someone touch your arm and you would see that they're taking their hand off your shoulder, right? Something where it's like it'd be really hard between the period that they touched my arm and I looked back, it'd be hard to make it look like you didn't touch me at all. So that was weird, but logical explanation, I'm just getting really into the haunted side of things, right? So no worries. But I do kind of like brush off my shoulder because like I still have that weird feeling that a hand is on my shoulder. However, I do that and then I feel kind of like each individual fingertip, like kind of like not necessarily digging into my arm, but like you could tell that like something was like grabbing onto my arm and I could feel each finger. Now that was really weird. So I'm looking again, like maybe someone behind me is just trying to freak me out. I went with my college's paranormal club, so we were all like relatively close and kind of like we would sometimes play those kinds of jokes on each other. No, it was not one of those people behind me, but as I'm looking, I can still feel those fingertips on my shoulder. I'm starting to like kind of like freak out, but I don't want anyone else to like kind of know that I'm freaking out. So I'm trying to keep my cool, brush my shoulder again. But again, I feel that pressure a few seconds later. And it's not until we walk out of the basement that I don't feel that hand anymore. Now, like I said, most logical explanation, I was just getting really into my head. I was getting into the haunted aspect. Therefore, logically, I'm just, my brain's playing a trick on me. And again, I can totally see it. Like, if someone's listening to this episode, they're just like, yeah, it's just your imagination. If I was listening to this story too, I would 100% um be on your side, and I'm still kind of in that boat almost, and it happened to me. But then at the same time, almost I don't want to say I'm humoring that side of like, oh, it was really a ghost, but almost like one of those things where it's like looking at it through a believer's eyes, it's like the in that sense, the logical explanation is the fact that it was George. He Like I said, he was very protective of the Clemens family. So maybe he felt like we as a tour group just kind of overstayed our welcome. So maybe he was just trying to like get someone to like urge the group to like get out. So again, that's like from a believer's perspective versus a skeptic's perspective. So what do you guys think? Let me know. All of my social media will be linked in the show notes. Do you guys have any personal scary stuff that's happened to you? Let me know. Uh, my next episode in 2 weeks will be about shadow people. So be prepared for that. If you are sensitive to getting sleep paralysis, I would recommend you skip that episode. But next week, not next week, the next episode will be shadow people. So I'm excited. If you guys have any personal experience with that, please reach out to me. I would love to share your stories if you're cool with it on my podcast. So I will see you guys next time. Please reach out to me on social media. Stay creepy, y'all.